complicated, you know, man. Like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about that blue, red, man, then you get to one side, and like, messed
All right, MikeOfPol, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
I am doing fantastic. After a long battle with a particularly difficult job, I have fully repaired the machines under my care, and so I can rest easy now. And I just want to thank you so much for having me back on.
Yeah, definitely, man. I'm glad to have you on. I should say, and I'll be sure to link this in the description, that you were recently on Gio Panichetti's channel. It was a great interview. I'll be sure to link that. But you actually had a specific topic that you wanted to discuss with me today. So do you want to kind of intro the man that you want to center this episode around?
Yeah, so I want to talk about Sir Joseph Whitworth. He is a master of machines and a master of engineering precision. In fact, he is the beginning of essentially all engineering precision. Yeah, I mean, he's the one that invented it all. Anything that is engineered, to find measurement, his work is the basis of all of it. And I want to talk about him in order to maybe reach back to a conversation or a question that you had for me last time that I was on that I don't think I satisfactorily answered, which was what is the new relationship between man and machine? And I think a synopsis of Sir Joseph Whitworth's life is actually a very good way to get there.
Well, fair enough. Sorry, I was briefly muted. So you set up the outline for it. So where does our story start with this guy?
So I am pulling from Kissinger's Legacy reprints from the book The Creators of the Age of Steel. And this is just a reprint of the chapter on Sir Joseph Whitworth. But and this is where I gained all the information, in researching, this man's life. So Joseph Whitworth was born in Cheshire in 1803. So if you can cast your mind, back that far to, a more regal England, this man is, wholly and totally a reserved, kind of conservative English guy. So if you can cast your mind back all the way that way, he was educated by his dad until he was 12 years old. And then he was sent to a private academy in Leeds for, about 2 years. And then he went to work for his uncle at a cotton mill in Derbyshire. So, he worked there, and while he was there over the 4 years he stayed there, he kind of became enamored with all of the machines that, he had to help fix. Back in these days, all of the mechanical contrivances that ran the world and much of industry were very bespoke. They were all handmade. Everything was made to fit and very unique. And so, often, if things needed repair, you needed to, best as you could repair them yourself. And so he became enamored with this process with working in the mill and fixing all of the mechanical contrivances that ran the place. So so he worked there for years, and then at 18 he left to go to the workshop. He was like, Unc, I'm sorry, this was a great time, but I'm out. Peace out. I've got to go, develop my skills in mechanical craft. And so um, uh, he left to Manchester in order to work under a skilled mechanic. And so he ended up at the workshop of Maudsley and Clements. And so this was actually very, very good for him. So Maudsley was a tool inventor himself. He was very famous for inventing, several processes and tools, which is something that became the preoccupation of Whitworth. But also Clements, the other owner of this particular interest, was one of the most skilled mechanics ever. I mean, part of his work was put into the Babbage calculating machine. So the early mechanical calculators. I mean, this guy was a genius. Both of them were geniuses unto themselves, and he happened upon, like stumbling into like, I want to apprentice here. Teach me all that you can, which is just like it's a miracle that a man of of such early prowess and fascination with these things, he just like walked in. It's like, hey, I want a job. I want to learn all I can, and they gave it to him. So, um, this, and like I said earlier, most machine work, most machine work was craft. It was done with hammers, chisels, files, and maybe a lathe if you had a nice workshop. So, and maybe a screw cutting machine if you're at a really high end workshop. So, and that was like the whole that was like the whole tool set you had to work with, um, as someone who actually built machines or repaired machines. So, also, things like how fine measurement precision was back then. Like the standard measure was like all the way down to an eighth of an inch, something that's very imprecise. Whereas, like, the most skilled workman would work all the way down to 30 seconds of an inch, right? But that's still an extremely imprecise measure. So, this is kind of the world that he's coming into as like a junior mechanic. Um,
Well, and that's something that you see in like the machinery of the time, right? That I don't mean to take anything away from it. There's obviously a lot of workmanship, but the idea of completely interchangeable parts just didn't exist, right? So I've mentioned a
no,
couple times that I really like the Jamestown Society, who runs the kind of historical site in Virginia, has a YouTube channel, and it's great for just like whiling away sleepy afternoons. And of course, they employ a number of artisans there who kind of teach crafts, and one of them is a blacksmith. And what's interesting is that the armor used at the time in the early 17th century, much of it was actually screwed together, but the screws were made at the same time as the plate, and basically they were just made to fit one bolt, right? There was just
yes.
a male and a female side, and the idea that they were in any way interchangeable, like that was not in the that's not how people thought. It was not within their reach.
In fact, it's very funny because this is something that Whitworth set his sights against. He saw this as after his first invention, which was well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. So, like during his time learning the craft of about I think it was 8 more years, he set his sight on machine tools. Machines that their purpose is to make other machines, which was something that maybe you saw in France at the time, like one good screw cutting lathe in France, but it was a niche device. So like this is the beginning of engineering precision in screw threads, in flat plates and stuff like that. Like just the beginning of this process. And so that is something that he set himself up to do in the shop, was to like increase the efficiency of this interest that he was working at by making machine tools and early measurement devices and things that could get better than a 32nd of an inch measurement consistently, and these sorts of things. And then he ended up uh, after he moved away from this interest, he saw like the first barrier to entry was like creating perfectly flat plates. Like you can't make anything precise without perfectly flattening sides of things. So he devised the new method, right? The touch-up plate scraping method, where you take three plates and you cover it with dye, and then you rub the plates together, and then wherever the dye has worn off, that's where they're touching, and everywhere there is still dye, you lightly scrape until you get perfect match and of the plates. And so the only it's actually backed up by a bit of mathematics. The only plane, the only type of surface that can be shared between three types of plates is a perfectly flat surface. There's no other way at the end of this process to get things to rub where all the dye on both plates, or on all three plates, when they rub them together, for all the dye to be worn away. They have to be perfectly flat. So by the end of like this particular type of process, this indicator and scraping process, you would have plates that were, I mean, the most perfectly flat things that you could make. In fact, later on, some scientists at the Society of Engineers in Great Britain, actually, you could stick these things together, and then you couldn't pull them apart. And they actually devised a test by which they put these things in a vacuum as to not be affected by humidity, and then like put weights on these plates to see how much sticking force between the things there was. And like the things were inseparable up to 100 pounds. And it's insane that he was so studious in his work as to make something that precise at that time.
Well,
So
and
very, very
then,
interesting point.
you know, what little I know about this man, right? He was kind of singularly obsessed with this type of precision and interchangeability. You know, you mentioned the type of units that, you know, machinists at the time were using, which is like, okay, if you're really, really special, maybe you'll get to a 32nd or a 64th, right? Which,
Yes.
well, certainly probably better than I could do with hand tools, is not a precision machine, right? And he's credited, if I'm correct, with developing the thousandth, right? Which is
Yes.
significantly finer measurement.
Well, he devised a machine that could measure all the way down to a millionth of an inch. But of course, you can't actually control temperature, or especially at this time, you can't control temperature in an environment, in any environment back then, to actually get consistent measurements down to a millionth of an inch. But this is the type of thing that he was just obsessed with, was a scientific empirical endeavor into like studying precision and implementing that into his craft. Um, so I'll continue. So eventually in 1933, he left London to go to Manchester to open up his own workshop, and there is where he did most of his innovations after that. So this is where he set his sights yeah, shortly after, to create a planing machine. So to reduce the effort of the process of actually like doing this scraping technique, which was by far more efficient than the hand flattening that was being done in shops before. He set his sights on creating a machine out of all hand flattened with this same procedure. He made a machine by hand that would now do this process, right? All of the blood, sweat, and tears had to be done over and over and over again for all of these parts. But once he made this machine, he now had a machine that can flatten one edge of one part. And we don't think about like how revolutionary that is, but that's insane. Then he could go on and make the next machine that improves some precision process, that much faster, because he could make the parts for it faster.
Well, and that's an interesting kind of extension of that skill, right? Like it's one thing to be sort of, you know, singularly focused on one aspect of precision, you know, and maybe we could say that's an impressive piece of craftsmanship, but to take that ability to manufacture precision and kind of extend it to, you know, something that basically kind of makes that what would have been previously like a lifetime of skill and turns it into operating a machine is a very interesting thing.
Yes, very interesting. So, and it continues. So the next thing he set his sights on were, of course, screw threads. He saw while observing both locomotive and seafaring vessels, he was like, "Holy shit! Like every single screw that you take out to repair something, every nut and bolt pair has to be put back together in the same order, or else it will never go back together because these nuts and bolts, these screws are, they're all bespoke. They're all different. So he set his eyes on this, and of course, very quickly came up with the most precise screw cutting machine that had ever been devised, and tried to basically get more of these machines and more. He essentially made a master, what is like a master screw copier, right? So he would make a bunch of copies of these master screws that could be inserted and fitted into other screw fitting machines. And because he could replicate this master screw like 1,000 times, he had already figured out the process. So he distributed a bunch of these all of these master blanks to other shops so that they could set up their screw cutting machine to do the same thing. And it was by this process of like open collaboration in industry that he was able to, like, the Whitworth standard screw was the standard screw for all of Britain for a very long time. Like and it was by this time that everyone was like, holy shit, dude, this guy is the man. Like he revolutionized both the locomotive trade, because like everyone wanted Whitworth screws, of course, because like you didn't have to care if you mixed up nuts and bolts and stuff. So of course, like his shop was also like a chief concern in railway and shipbuilding as well, at least like as a support uh, industry for that. So after that, let's see. Do. So after that, he sets upon like making some new inventions where, like street sweeping. Street sweeping used to be like a 50-man crew kind of job, but none of the streets ever got clean. So he set upon himself like, hey, can I invent basically like a horse-drawn carriage that automatically sweeps the street? And all of a sudden, quality of life improves because the streets are clean and not full of horseshit anymore, essentially. So, and he started taking out patents, which, like, as an interesting aside, patent cost at that time was 500 to 600 pounds, which is just stupid money these days. Um, so I think that's like a interesting aside on patent law, where he didn't patent so many things like processes like for like screw cutting and stuff like that. That was something that was openly collaborated in industry, but it was only economical to patent, whole devices that were revolutionary at the time. And I think as a litigation of our current, IP schema that we have now, I think that's something that we might want to go back to. But that's just an aside. So like I said, like he goes on inventing more measurement devices at his own interest, gauges, machine tools, tools for drilling, shaping, slotting, and a bunch of other things. I mean, he was the machine tool master. Um, and eventually he goes on, continuing his interest, working just with other industry partners, and kind of like a support, kind of like a support role where he's selling these machines, or even service to make certain precision parts for other industry leaders, until the outbreak of the Crimean War, where there was a committee established by the British government to investigate, like, how can we build more Enfield rifles. So this is a very interesting turning point, um, in Whitworth's life, because he's a man that is chiefly interested in furthering industry and making sure that the machines that are made for export from Britain, let's say like trains or anything like that, didn't have to be worked on outside the country. Like, he was chiefly concerned with like the industrial capacity of his nation. He had very high sights. But then all of a sudden a committee comes to him and it's like, hey, can you set up a shop to make a bunch of Enfield rifles? And he kind of waffles for a bit, and then he tells the committee, like, look, there is not sufficient data. Like, I'm an empiricist. Like, there's not enough data to tell me like how to make the barrel of a gun. Like, even your own lieutenants and sergeants reports are all over the map. They're like, some guns shoot good and some don't, and we don't know why. So he said, like, look, before I set up, like, I'm a perfectionist at heart and I know I can perfect things. So give me a pot of money so I can vigorously research what makes a good gun and good bullet. And they go back and waffle for a little bit. And then eventually they say, oh, okay, fine, you can build a shooting range, and here's so many accoutrements, to help fund your measurement, of internal, external, and terminal ballistics. And it's at this time that Whitworth turns his sights wholly towards facilitating the foreign policy interests and this time were couched as like facing the enemy. Very simple nationalistic terms. This is where he turned all of his effort to, because he doesn't do anything but give 100% towards what he's tasked with. So after a storm pushed over the shooting range at which a totally enclosed shooting range that he asked for from the government, so that he could have no wind effect. Like, he made the first shooting tunnel because he was like, I want to measure every single part of the ballistics of the gun to make. So he sets up like incremental cards of paper so that he can actually see the shape of the bullet hole as it's flying to the target, to see if the bullet's wobbling. Like, that no one else had done this before. And he was like, well, obviously I want to see, how the bullet is flying. And so he just naturally comes up with this conclusion that, oh, of course I need this, enclosed shooting range to actually measure all these things. So, a storm pushes over that shooting range. It was reconstructed several years later, and then he actually gets a test underway, and then he proceeds to revolutionize all of ballistics. Um, he ended up determining for the time, which is Black Powder Age, what is the best bullet diameter, what is the best twist rate for a barrel, how to construct a barrel the best way, how to rifle it the best way, what is the best bullet construction. I mean, this guy came back with a report that said, hey, I've perfected everything, and here's a gun I've made. Would you like to see it? Like, this is the best gun that can be made. And of course, the government, is like, sure, like, this is a new pattern of rifle, of course, due to all the changes. And so they're like, like, what, but we like the Enfield rifle. We wanted you to like figure out the Enfield rifle. Like, I'm glad you figured out this report, but like, we don't want these rifles. We want better Enfield rifles, if anything, right? Or more Enfield rifles. So eventually this, like, he's kind of like sat there with like, well, they only commissioned me for this report, so at least now I know, like, I have the best rifle in the world. I did my duty and gave them all the information. They'll take this and run with it. Until the National Rifle Association, no, not that one, not the one we have. There's actually a very different National Rifle Association, which is like a tradition of shooting sport kind of club. It's very different in Britain. It's not the NRA that we have here. But the National Rifle Association put forth an advertisement in 1860 calling for the most perfect rifle that could be invented. And of course, because Whitworth already has it, he takes it out and says, voila, best rifle ever. I've already beat the competition, and proceeds to smoke everyone else in the field. So much so that the next year, when they had the same competition, no one else entered the competition. Whitworth took it, de facto, straight out the gate. Then the Queen, uh, and then on the inauguration of the first prize meeting, in Wimbledon, that rifle was shot by the Queen. So, just like a beautiful little piece of history there where this guy, so handedly beat everyone, like in industry, in something that in a project for, the defense industry, the burgeoning defense industry of the nation. He everything he comes to, he just smacks it out of the park. So, some details about the rifle. He could shoot accurately up to 1,000 yards with that rifle, when the French competition rifles could only withdrew from the competition at 700 yards in 1860. Just like fascinating. Um, so yeah, the government like is watching and seeing all this, and this was a quite an excellent bit of showmanship. So much so that when the Martini Henry rifle was getting looked at, which incorporated a lot of the developments that Whitworth made in in all of his endeavors. The British government was seriously looking at this. And then in a debate in the House of Commons, Mr. Turner said, and this is a little bit of extended quote: Sir Joseph Whitworth has engaged in manufacturing instruments of peace. When he was applied to by the government, he turned his interest to instruments of war. It was not his wish to enter upon the manufacture of these rifles, but having been applied to by the government, he gave his skill and energy, and devoted thousands of pounds of his own private fortune to carry on experiments which were the first originated in the instance of the government. Sir Joseph had no desire to make a fortune by manufacturing these rifles, but had a desire to benefit his country by the production of the best weapons that could be manufactured for its defense, and to bring his skill to bear in producing an arm which would enable the troops of his country to meet the enemy, both at home and abroad, with effect. He ended by producing the very best weapon ever invented. That was the only honor he sought, and he has attained it, although very scantly justice has been done to him since he completed his experiments. So, even members of the House of Commons were like, dude, this guy just like, he revolutionized the whole field of riflery. And everyone is like, oh, I think we're going to adopt the Martini Henry rifle, or at least it was getting a serious look at by the British government. And this guy's like, what the fuck are you doing? We already knew this shit from this guy, our own boy. So the very interesting, very interesting turning point, where he set his sights on riflery and got acknowledged in the House of Commons as like the very best that Britain had to offer.
So that's interesting. You mentioned that you both wanted to talk about this man as kind of an aspirational figure, and then also kind of relate him to your thoughts on technology more generally.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. I guess my last notes about him is just, after he revolutionized riflery, he then turned his sights to cannons and naval guns, and blew the competition out of the water. Mastered metallurgy, made the very best steel that could be made at that time, and then turned 100,000 pounds then. Um, 100,000 pounds then would be $19 million USD into forming engineering geniuses of the future. It made a scholarship to get people to study the engineering sciences. And then after that, after doing all that and still working in industry, and then managing, this humongous sum of money that's just dedicated to making engineering geniuses, like I said, uh, he then kind of at the turnover of the into the 1880s, like, or 1870s, sorry. there's kind of like a growing dispute between labor and capital at that time, and um, Whitworth sets his sight on making kind of like an investment pool for workers. He wants to, because he's like a so like Britain first like guy, he wants to ameliorate these relationships before anything comes of it. He actually wants everybody to be in lockstep as people in England. So and on this, Carlyle actually wrote him a letter and said that these people that you employ in Darley, like I think that uh, this arrangement that you have made is like very it's very smart minded, and I can't I can't celebrate like the things that you're doing to actually ameliorate issues with our fellow countrymen enough. And like the letter goes on to be beautiful, but yeah, that's kind of like the broad strokes of his life, just to tie it up in a little bow, because I went on too long, I think, already. So I wanted to talk about Whitworth in terms of like the relationship of technology, because like this is kind of like this is the older era. This is also like when things actually began to be automated, like more machines building more machines building more machines. Whitworth is the man who did it. And even at the time, before there were riots about people losing jobs, or even like the disputes between labor and capital, where something that he was trying to ameliorate right off the get-go, where wages started declining. That was something that he wanted to ameliorate instantly, like intuitively, because he thought, there is something innate in man controlling machines, and machines should serve as reducing the effort of man while making his life better. So, of course, all of the riches he got out of industry, he actually had kind of like a paternalistic sharing nature. He was like, no, I'm going to make sure my workers are getting taken care of. So this is all under the paradigm of man is controlling machine. And even when it starts to harm people by taking away some of their wages or even replacing their jobs, I want to make sure they're taken care of, because no byproduct of machines being made should hurt the human condition. That is his mindset, as this like I guess you could say he's like semi-progressive, right? He thinks that this relationship, man is commander of machines, but we see that kind of fell away and gave to, I guess, a new paradigm, which is not something that can be controlled in the way that Whitworth wanted to control it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? Because that term progressive kind of loses its meaning once you get to a certain kind of like time in the past, right? That, it's often said that really America was just a progressive country, and the conservative movement just kind of grafted on top of it. And you see that in reading about, men of this era, right? Where social progress is just kind of assumed as a good, right? This idea of things getting better through kind of human ingenuity is just an assumed premise. But, within that is the idea that, well, if it is not making life better, what's the point of it, right? Like his street sweeping machine, the reason that he's desired to create these precision machines, it is not just kind of like for the end in of itself. It's effectively to kind of lift up human civilization, I guess.
Exactly. No, that's exactly the point. Like, machines and the advancement of engineer, the burgeoning field of engineering, which did not exist before him. Like real engineering didn't exist before Whitworth, and and he saw this as like a great way where it, through the prowess of both himself and his fellow man, could make things better in some way. So not maybe not in a Whig version of history, not in some glib American sense, but in a different sense that had more to do with like, I don't know, an optimism about having good craft, because it's in everybody's intuition that doing a good job is good. We don't know why we think this, but like just like being a good engineer at that time, it was like, no, it's like, well, if there's any bad that comes with it, like, well, we'll fix it, but like doing a good job is good de facto. So I guess this like transfers onto our time, and we're like, well, this sounds so foreign to us because all of the smartest people are in finance, and the people just below that are in tech. And tech obviously has deleterious effects, like to the max. You think about all of these social engineers and 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 people who work on microtransactions and video games, or God forbid, in the porn industry, or something like that, to hook your brain into a certain facet of technology that they're kind of orchestrating. We see that this is absolutely not the case. Obviously, something has gone very wrong where technology has totally flipped over and maybe shown its other side, or maybe shown its true self. But I don't think this is the case. So I want to kind of transfer now into talking about a book I've been recently reading through. I haven't finished it yet, but I've gained some really cool, really sick insights from it, which is On the Mode of Existence of Technical Objects by Gilbert Simondon, a French thinker. He's hailed by other kind of like postmodernist philosophers, which all of of course. I think they're interesting reads. I think they have interesting propositions by the way they kind of like suss things out when they talk about them. And this book is all about like what is the nature by which technical objects exist? What are some of the features of their existence, and also what is man's relationship to technical objects, to machines, or even things that you wouldn't think of as a technical object, like a liquor bottle. Like a liquor bottle is in itself a technical object because it is a byproduct of like very standardized machinic processes, and it serves a singular concrete function, or concretize. He defines it as like concretize, like all of this liquor bottle's like being is focused on or is all in the service of its one task, which is like holding and displaying liquor or something like that. Or you can think of the same thing with like other storage devices like DVD cases or something like that. There's something intrinsic about, everything is technical around us. Everything is a technical object. So we need to understand these things as technical objects to figure out what is our relationship to them. And in the book, he runs around to the point where, well, there's basically three different types of understanding of our relationship to tech. Or it's weird because the translation from French, technics means like both like technical things and the process by which they're made, and like technics in the Man in Technics, Oswald Spengler, like the arbitrary technical thing. So it kind of means three things, so it's harder to suss through. But there's three understandings of it. Two of them are misunderstandings, and one of them is the proper understanding. So you can either misunderstand technology to be like this ultimate progressive good and worship it as a god, which would be something like E/AC, right? Except E/accelerationism, AI god stuff, right? Or you can misunderstand it as like the ultimate cage, like the thing that will immanentize the slavery of all humanity. Just drive yourself insane by just being near it. So this would be something like, Uncle Ted enjoyers or appreciators. So, and then the third way of understanding technology is in fact that like, well, this new way that technical objects exist around us is like, well, they serve some function to be orchestrated by humans. So in this way, you can understand, the machines that you interact with, like the orchestra, and you are the director. Of course, the way that the orchestra plays a note, or how fast they play a note, gives you feedback by which, like, okay, we got to slow this down. Oh, we got to speed this up. We need it louder. We need it quieter, right? So there is a way in which that man and machine is linked into an assembly, or an assemblage, as he kind of puts it in the book. And we have to think of ourselves in this way in order to have a proper understanding and a good relationship with technology that we have now, and also the technology that we will invent in the future. And this is something that I want to focus on, is the creation of technology. If we have people who have the right mindset, then we can avoid some of the issues of uh, the, how do you say it? The Dave the Distributist made a big paper about this. The purpose of the system is what it does. Yes, sorry. The purpose of the system is what it does. And we can actually have people go into creating technology with that mindset and avoid the pornography, like just make profits by brainwashing people route, and instead go for something that's more fostering of goodness in the human condition.
Well, yeah, I think that's sort of an interesting discussion more broadly in our spheres, right? Is what is the nature of technology? Like, is it in and of itself corrosive? And I think that, maybe someone who is a techno pessimist might say, well, of course, a man like Whitworth was able to sort of, make the human condition better. But the problem is, that kind of drive has no limiting factor to it, and the same kind of like ideology within technology that said, like, oh, you have to make a better screw, you have to make a flatter plate, is the same thing driving us to kind of create better Skinner boxes to, absorb infinitely more and more attention. I don't know if that's necessarily what I think, but that's an argument I've heard.
Sure, and I think you're right there. But I think just like Whitworth, the aim, or like, he came into what he was doing with a goal first, right? And a very particular goal first, right? Improve the working of a man in shipbuilding or in the train yard, right? By doing that, here is one thing I can improve his life, because he doesn't have to match pair screws or something like that. Whereas our current set of, I guess, managers who direct the the kind of like the money flows that dictate what sort of technology gets made. Of course, their incentive and their goal, first of all, is to make money first and not to make a better rat trap. So that is what I'm trying to kind of drive at. And like, part of that is understanding now the rat traps are kind of bound to humanity as soon as they come out of the factory. And you can think of this as like, well, what is, I think the most lurid, evil, and best way to think about this is pornography, right? Pornography is the flesh trade, right? And it is something that, well, it's made of humans, just retransmogrified into this digital form, into this technical form, right? That can be infinitely displayed a trillion times, right? It is bound to us because it's humans that consume us. It is a mechanical intermediary through the screen. There is another human that is like obviously not in a good spot, right? So the goal is, or the goal by which that sort of technology was made, it obviously had the ends of something else, either the manipulation of the public, containing the psyche of the public in a Edward Bernays propaganda trap sort of thing, as anyone who's looked into like the ownership of these companies that run most of the digital flesh trade markets, as I like to call them, like those people obviously have ulterior motives. Like, they have goals other than a better rat trap for someone on the other end. That is obviously not their goal. It's either just mere profit or manipulating people. Whereas, like, if we had a better class of men that understood that all technology is bound to humans as soon as it comes out of the factory, as soon as it comes into being, right? And with that aim in mind, look towards this kind of like cybernetic effect, right? The idea that control structures like have this innate sociological effect, and therefore like you cannot look at technology as just the thing in itself, but also like you have to look forward and see like its interaction with society first, and you can kind of a priori from first principles kind of determine if this is going to be a better rat trap or not. That's my whole argument, is that there is an understanding by which like we can have a new captain of industry that does make a better rat trap, that maybe facilitates something like better communication, and not like the social media we have, which is kind of all screen. It's all like fourth order simulacra bullshit, right? Is there a way to make a technology that's actually a better rat trap instead of just being a dopamine trap?
Well, that's fair, and I think that it sort of speaks to kind of the degradation of kind of civic religion, right? I think about this a lot, that humans are motivated by status signals, or motivated by kind of cultural memes, and because of that, what is seen in kind of a civic religious context as like a good and noble act, something that will win you acclaim, is sort of what the most ambitious go towards, right? So, for instance, right, the inventor we're talking about, for all of his actions, was given a baronage, right? He was given a title. He was kind of put forth as this great man of society. I mentioned a couple times in my town, there's a square, and there's a small park with a statue in it devoted to a local doctor who 300 years ago gave up his wealth to run a free clinic. And so within that, right, when status becomes basically completely synonymous with like economic extraction, right, where wealth becomes kind of the pure signifier of status, you get that sort of rent-seeking behavior, because it's not the being an inventor, it's not producing something great that wins you acclaim. It is simply like a certain number of fungible tokens with no kind of value placed on how they're gotten.
Okay, I think you're exactly right, and I think I think much of this conversation does boil down to, I think the key critique you may be levering or prying at there is like, this is a conversation for a when we win type of scenario. When we have based world, then we can have elites that set up the sort of incentives and institutions that facilitate an environment where the creation of technical objects, of technical things, begets like this sort of idea. It instills upon maybe the middle, that no, what actually your goal in creating things is better rat traps. But I think people generally are starting to see a little bit of this. And if I might pull from the book, from Simondon's book, man no longer needs a universalizing liberation, but mediation. The new magic, and by new magic, I think he's talking about like re-enchanting the world. Like something similar to what Prudentialists just wrote about. Go check out our good friend on Twitter, Prudentialist. Um, the magic will not be found in a direct expression of the individual power to act, assured by the knowledge that gives each gesture effective certainty, but in the rationalization of forces that situate man by giving him meaning within a human and natural ensemble, right? And by ensemble, this is a technical phrase he defines earlier in the book, about that kind of like man-machine automatic binding that happens as soon as it comes out of the factory, because we're no longer the tool wielders. We don't live under the regime of tool wielding, right? So I think you're right, but I think the type of people that we want to have in power in something like a renegade elite, that someone that we would support, like if it's not something like EAC or Full TED, I think this is the middle ground where like people in our sphere generally, if they wanted to come to a consensus on what's kind of the best path forward, because I think, you can sort of dismiss Ted out of hand by saying like, oh, if everyone in America goes full Amish, then of course, like, the Chinese or whoever, right? You don't have to name a particular geopolitical interest, because let's say the maps completely shift by the time America goes full Ted K, right? And everyone's Amish in its based world. It's like, well, geopolitical concerns via the way of the technical means of producing war, like, obviously we'll just get steamrolled, um, and subsumed into some other power. And then on the other side, E acceleration, EAC, you can see, I think everyone can see quite plainly, especially with the very, lib controllers of the technology, like, even with this latest development of AI video production from OpenAI. One of the first things it says is like, we've got safety teams and all of that standing by. We're working on the safety as to not offend, certain people and stuff like that. Like, huge disclaimer. It's just like the rest of it. So obviously, if AI becomes a god in some like EAC sort of sense, like, it's gonna be like a lib god that like totally destroys like human flourishing anyway. It's totally, misguided to put your faith in the development of some sort of like a mechanical Turk like deity from these people. It's obviously either going to be shit and not, actually, create the fruitful future that they think it does, or it's going to create a future where it automatically enforces South African sort of, racial hatred or something like that. It's going to be horrible. So I think this is the middle path that over time, people like us, kind of like absorbing, a better understanding of technology through these three modes of understanding man's relationship technology. This semi middle path is actually what we want to look for in an elite.
Well, fair enough, man. I think that's a compelling argument. Is there anything else you want to address before we bring this thing to a close?
No, I think I summed it up pretty well. I think maybe there's something to say like how Simon Dunn, he actually does a breakdown of the different centuries and how they understood technology in the different interchanges, over the 17th, 18th, 19th century, in how this relationship kind of evolved. And I think that's a very interesting point in the book where he talks about like this very frustrated interchange that basically beget Marx, and people like that uh, who I guess were feeling like a very unfair thing happening with the burgeoning of like technical means by which to produce things. And of course, like, they were getting screwed. So where are they going to go except for extremists and stuff like that? So I think that's maybe a very interesting point in the book. And maybe I just recommend, On the Mode of Existence of Technical Objects by Simondon. And, hopefully other people, like, as I continue to get through the back half of the book, maybe someone else will bring something else that may be of intrigue that maybe I might have missed on Twitter or something like that. But, that's where I stand right now in my current understanding of kind of combining both the history of this man, his influences, and this book.
Well, fair enough, man. If people want to find more of your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
You can find me on Twitter at MikeOfPol. I also have a Odyssey account. We don't know if Odyssey is going to go away or whatever. I'm backing up my stuff there and playing it by ear there. But you can find me at Michelangelo of Pol. I've got like half of a series up there, and then also a bunch of musical projects up there. So if you want to check those out, you can check them out there. And then I also have a Substack that's at MikeOfPol at .substack or MikeOfPol.substack.com. You can find me there. I only have one article up. I've got like 3 articles in the works. It's just like, it takes me a long time to write because I want to get it perfect, but eventually, in the next 4 months, I'm gonna have like 3 articles just back to back.
Well, great, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. If you want to find my stuff, you can find Jay Burden Show on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a Substack, recently published an article just a few hours ago. I recommend you check that out. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to check out Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching, so you can get your fitness needs sorted out there. And again, Mike, I appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you for having me on again, man.
And to everyone at home, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.